Cost per acquisition, sometimes abbreviated CPA, is the cost to acquire a single customer or lead through a specific marketing campaign or channel, distinct from the broader blended customer acquisition cost (CAC) metric that aggregates spend across the entire revenue function. The metric originated in direct marketing, digital advertising, and context in like the 1990s, 2000s, as companies needed channel-level efficiency measurements to support allocation decisions across multiple acquisition channels. So the B2B SaaS adaptation has evolved considerably, the CPA serving as the cleanest channel-level efficiency measurement that informs marketing investment allocation, channel optimization, campaign performance evaluation. The distinction between CPA and CAC really matters because CAC is that blended metric that captures total customer acquisition cost across all channels. And CPA is that channel-specific or campaign-specific metric that reveals which sources of acquisition are most efficient. So today, CPA sits among the most watched metrics in marketing operations because companies running multi-channel acquisition strategies where the relative efficiency of different channels determines investment allocation need this metric. The metric varies considerably by channel, by campaign type, by target segment, and this variation is one of the most diagnostic signals available for distinguishing real marketing investments that produce real economic value from those that produce activity without the proportional return. So that rigorous CPA measurement at the channel and campaign level really separates sophisticated marketing operations from less mature ones. And the degree to which companies apply this rigor is just a major determinant of marketing investment effectiveness across the industry. So what's the formula for customer cost per acquisition, right? It's total marketing spend on channel divided by number of customers acquired through that channel. Very simple, but there's a few variations on that. So first you have a channel level CPA. So channel level CPA is a spend on a specific channel divided by the acquisitions attributed to that channel. Then you have campaign level CPA, which, as you might guess, is spend on a specific campaign divided by acquisitions attributed to that campaign. Next, you have a cohort level CPA. So you've got channel level, campaign level, cohort CPA. A cohort CPA is a CPA for a specific cohort of customers, tracking how efficiency has evolved over that cohort. And then finally, you have a fully loaded CPA where you can have a fully loaded channel CPA, fully loaded cohort CPA, fully loaded campaign CPA. Fully loaded just means that when you're talking about spend, it includes the program spend and the allocated team cost and resources rather than just program spend alone. So here's a worked example, right? Let's say you have a marketing operation that runs 3 primary channels. You've got paid search at $850K spend, producing, let's say, 300 customers for roughly a CPA of $2,500. Content marketing at $400K spend, producing 200 customers for a CPA of about $2K. And then events at $600K, producing 80 customers for a CPA of about $7,500. That disaggregated view really shows paid search and content marketing at similar efficiency, while events are 3 times the cost, which is very common. This disaggregation supports an informed channel investment allocation. And channel level measurement is what makes CPA really actionable rather than merely descriptive. So let's dive into a deeper explanation of CPA. So the reason CPA exists as a distinct metric from CAC, from customer acquisition costs, is that channel level efficiency varies enormously, and decisions about marketing investment require that channel level visibility rather than just blended averages. So a company with overall CAC of 4,000 might have one channel operating at 1,500 and another at 8,000, with that variation suggesting investment rebalancing opportunities that blended CAC metric hides. So that channel level CPA measurement supports that investment allocation. And running this practice over multiple cycles produces a marketing portfolio that compounds in efficiency. So effective CPA measurement depends on a few methodological choices. First of all, attribution methodology. First touch, last touch, multi-touch, time decay. These all yield different CPA calculations based on the same data. The attribution window is the second factor. That matters because windows that are too short miss the long conversion cycle of B2B sales. Windows that are too long mix acquisitions across multiple campaign cycles. That cost inclusion matters because narrow definition, like program spend only, produce different numbers than fully loaded definitions, including the team cost, right? Each methodological choice that you make should be documented and published alongside the numbers so that you can support a meaningful comparison and trustworthy reporting for your CPA analysis. So a few edge cases kind of matter in practice, right? Channels with long conversion windows often appear less efficient, on short window CPA calculations, even when their true contribution is meaningful. And a short window bias systematically underrates organic and brand building channels. And channels that contribute to multi-touch journeys but rarely originate them may appear less effective on first touch CPA, but more effective on multi-touch CPA. And so the methodology choice changes that investment conclusion. Channels with high fixed cost, like events and conferences, have CPA that swings considerably with attendance and conversion outcomes, which makes single period CPA sort of less reliable than multi-period averages, which is why you want to have the right methodology for the right channel or the right campaign or the right cohort, right? Each variation warrants explicit attention, and methodological rigor is what produces that CPA analysis that supports a sound investment reallocation or decision about how you actually want to spend that marketing investment. CPA also has a complex relationship with LTV. Channels producing low CPA but low LTV are less valuable, right? And channels producing higher CPA with higher LTV are more valuable. And an integrated view of CPA and LTV produces the picture of a channel economics truly. And looking at both together is what allows investment decisions to be based on actual economic value rather than cost efficiency alone. So channels that produce customers with strong retention and expansion and advocacy obviously contribute more value than CPA alone would suggest. You don't just want to optimize for the cost of something, you want to optimize for the value it brings you. So CPA is among the metrics most affected by emerging attribution and AI capabilities, basically, right? Companies have integrated these sophisticated multi-touch attribution and predictive customer scoring features into their models. And the gap is really widening between AI augmented and traditional CPA analysis. So what does this actually look like in practice, right? So let's say that you have a 25 million ARR Series B company called Forge, right? They're selling a developer platform to engineering teams and mid-market enterprise companies. And the CMO had been running marketing investment, let's say, across 5 primary channels for 2 years, based on historic patterns rather than rigorous CPA analysis. The team had been reporting a blended CAC monthly, but not built channel CPA visibility, right? So now you've got a new head of RevOps who proposed a comprehensive CPA analysis to inform the next year's investment allocation, with both first touch and multi-touch attribution methodologies applied to support different views of that channel value. So that RevOps director's analysis services, let's say, a few findings, right? 3 channels were operating at CPA below the company target, which CAC doesn't show. Paid search is at 2,100, content is at 1,800, customer referrals at 400, but let's say you've got events at 9,000, outbound sales at 5,000. So now investment allocation is roughly equal across the 5 channels, but the economics suggests a material rebalancing is warranted, right? Further analysis shows that the high CPA channels also, let's say, produce higher customer profiles. Events produce larger enterprise customers with higher LTV, and outbound produces customers with, let's say, average LTV. So that LTV integration that changes the conclusions about which channels actually deserved continued investment, right? So the response from the RevOps director and the CMO, let's say, is to rebalance investment based on an integrated CPA and LTV analysis. So they cut outbound sales investment materially while increasing investment in customer referral programs and content marketing. So they maintained events investment despite high CPA because the LTV of event-sourced customers justified the cost. Paid search investment held roughly stable, and over the following 4 quarters, a blended CAC dropped by 24%, total customer acquisitions grew by 20% on that rebalanced spend, and your LTV to CAC ratio improves from 3 to 5, right? So that channel level CPA analysis allowed the rebalancing of the same spend to be informed by actual economics rather than historic allocation patterns. Then you're generating way more revenue for way less spend, for the same amount of spend, actually. So let's debunk some myths around CPA. I'd say the most common CPA myth is that lower is always better. And in practice, low CPA may reflect channels that produce low value customers. Only integrated CPA and LTV views actually reveal the true channel economics. The second myth is that CPA is a marketing-only metric. In practice, this metric really affects sales operations through the quality of leads that are delivered. It affects finance through the unit economics implications. It affects products through the customer profile that different channels produce. And cross-functional CPA visibility really produces integrated decisions across the entire organization. The third myth is that single-touch attribution produces reliable CPA. In reality, B2B buying involves multiple touches across long cycles, and single-touch attribution systematically distorts CPA calculations. Mature teams use multi-touch attribution where the data supports it, with explicit attention to attribution methodology. The fourth myth is that CPA benchmarks are universal across companies and segments. So the reality is actually more nuanced. Appropriate CPA varies by motion, by segment, and competitive context. Internal benchmarks built from the company's own historical data are considerably more useful than industry averages. And then the deepest myth is that CPA is a static metric, measured the same way regardless of context. In practice, methodology choices affect the calculation materially, and explicit methodology paired with consistent application is what makes CPA analysis actually trustworthy over time. So we've looked at what CPA is, what it is at a deeper level, common myths around it, and now we look at how to apply it. So how does RevOps actually apply this? So the first place that RevOps applies CPA is in the multi-touch attribution infrastructure that connects marketing spend to close-won outcomes across realistic B2B time windows. So the default approach in Google Analytics or simple last-touch attribution systematically distorts CPA by giving 100% credit to whichever channel happened to be the last touch before the form fill, missing the 4 to 12 touches that typically precede an enterprise close. RevOps owns the multi-touch attribution implementation on Visible or Dream Data or Honeystack or HubSpot or a custom Snowflake dbt pipeline with configured 90 days for SMB, 180 to 365 days for enterprise, and that integration with Salesforce or HubSpot that surfaces source-level CPA on every closed opportunity. That implementation is going to take you 6 to 9 weeks, but it's going to be a great foundation on which every other marketing investment decision rests. The second application is in channel-level CPA reporting that disaggregates the blended marketing investment into source-level economics like we've been talking about. A blended CAC of $4,000 might hide a paid search of $2,800, content marketing at $1,900, referrals at $400, paid social at $5K, trade shows at $11K. And the aggregate average is useless for investment allocation. That disaggregated view drives rebalancing decisions. RevOps builds dashboards, again, in HubSpot or Looker or Mode or Sigma, joining the marketing spend from each channel. Sometimes you got to get it via API, but you have to have an aggregated view. And you can bring it into a marketing investment decision system like Plana or Vendor with the attributed conversions from the Visible or the Dream Data layer, right? And that surfaces channel level CPA over, let's say, trailing 4 quarters with cohort attribution, and brings the analysis. You bring that analysis to your quarterly marketing investment review with explicit reallocation recommendations. Okay, I know this is a bit of a complex, longer-term quarterly RevOps review, but this is an important meeting that your team should be having, and these are the kinds of metrics and preparations you should be making for that meeting. The third application is in the CPA to LTV integration that reveals the true channel economics rather than treating CPA as the optimization target. So a channel producing 1,500 CPA on customers with 4,500 LTV is producing a 3-to-1 LTV to CAC. Acceptable, but really not great, right? A channel producing 4,500 CPA on customers with 22,000 LTV is producing a 5-to-1, considerably more valuable despite the higher CPA. Right? And RevOps builds that integrated reporting that joins that channel CPA with channel level LTV. Now, how do you calculate channel level LTV? You usually calculate it from, let's say, a 24-month retention and expansion data for customers acquired through that channel. Evaluating channels on LTV and CAC rather than CPA alone is what produces investment decisions that maximize long-term value rather than short-term acquisition costs. The integrated LTV to channel level CPA is what's going to help you make the right investment decisions over time, rather than just getting distracted by the fact that you're doing CPA analysis and trying to optimize for that number. It could mislead you to acquiring customers that churn and don't expand, or really into the wrong segment of your market. And then the fourth application is in the channel saturation diagnosis that detects when a previously efficient channel has hit its diminishing returns. So paid search, for example, paid search channels saturate predictably as bidding pressure increases, right? A channel running 1,800 CPA at a 50K monthly spend often hits a 3,200 CPA at 150K monthly spend, with that marginal CPA on incremental spend being far higher than the average. So RevOps is meant to build the saturation analysis, which is the marginal CPA on incremental spend plotted against total channel investment. And it surfaces it to marketing leadership in that quarterly review meeting we talked about, with explicit recommendations on which channels are below saturation and warrant scaling up, and which channels are above saturation and warrant reallocation to other channels or to a creative audience refresh. So that concept of channel saturation is going to be given to you by that marginal CPA on incremental spend in those channels. That's how you're going to determine if a channel has been saturated and where it exists in relation to its saturation point. Should you invest more in it, or should you reallocate investments in that channel into a separate channel? So here are a few insights that you can extract from this. The first insight is really that channel level CPA disaggregation almost always reveals a 5 to 15x variation between best and worst channels, with that variance hidden underneath the aggregate CAC reporting, right? The aggregate customer acquisition cost reporting, because companies that have not done the disaggregation typically discover that 60 to 70% of their marketing spend is producing 30 to 40% of their closed won revenue, with the with that inefficiency concentrated in 2 to 3 specific channels. Typically, those channels are trade shows, syndicated content, and certain paid social campaigns. And the reallocation opportunities surfaced by that disaggregation typically improve aggregate CAC by 20 to 35%, because again, you're optimizing your spend on channels that are producing a lower CPA, so you're getting customers for cheaper, but also you want you want to spend the cheapest amount of money to get the customers, the lowest amount of money to get the customers with the highest LTV, right? That's the perfect unit economic situation. So then the second insight is that CPA must be evaluated with LTV in the same view, because low CPA channels routinely produce low lifetime value customers. And so self-serve, for example, self-serve trial signups typically have the lowest CPA, but also the highest churn and the lowest expansion. Whereas enterprise events, let's say, have the highest CPA, but produce customers with the strongest 5-year LTV. So evaluating channels on CPA alone systematically favors transactional channels at the expense of strategic ones, and that LTV to CAC integration is meant to actually correct this bias. The third insight is that attribution methodology choice affects CPA calculations materially. So first touch attribution overstates the value of awareness channels, and last touch overstates conversion channels. Linear underweights peak influence channels, and time decay typically produces the most defensible distribution. The model choice should be documented and consistent across periods. Companies that change attribution methodology without flagging the change produce CPA trend lines that mix methodology with actual performance and become impossible to interpret. The fourth insight is that CPA degrades 15 to 40% during macro tightening periods because buyers extend evaluation cycles and require more touches to convert, with the degradation concentrated in outbound and paid channels rather than organic and referral. Marketing mix should shift towards organic and referral investment ahead of anticipated macro pressure, with that shift completed before the CPA degradation has fully landed, because organic channels have 6 to 12-month ramp times. The fifth insight is that intent data and predictive scoring from 6sense, Demandbase, Bombora, Madkudu, meaningfully affect channel CPA economics when integrated into routing and prioritization rather than just reporting. So a channel that routes high-intent accounts to direct outreach and low-intent accounts to nurture produces markedly different CPA than one that treats all sources uniformly. And integrated intent data with channel-level routing is one of the higher leverage improvements available in mature CPA practice. So here are a few action items that RevOps organizations in a company can take and apply in their own RevOps teams. The first action is to implement multi-touch attribution on HubSpot, Enterprise, for example, Visible, Dream Data, Honeystack, or a custom Snowflake DBT pipeline with the time window configured to match your sales motion. 90 days for SMB, 180 to 365 for Enterprise, and the model documented so that time decay is typically the most defensible choice. Integrate that attribution layer with HubSpot or Salesforce so that source level attribution surfaces on every opportunity. and validate the model against node cases. So those are deals where you know exactly which touch drove the close before relying on it for future investment decisions. And then the second action is to build a channel-level CPA dashboard in HubSpot, Looker, Mode, or Sigma, joining marketing spend from each channel with actual attributed conversions. So with CPA visible over trailing quarters and broken out by segment, SMB, mid-market, and enterprise. Include marginal CPA on incremental spend, so the saturation analysis as a primary view, and bring that dashboard to the quarterly marketing investment review with explicit recommendations on which channels to scale, maintain, or cut. The third action is to integrate channel-level CPA with channel-level LTV in the same view, calculating LTV from actual 24-month retention and expansion data for customers acquired through each channel. That integrated LTV and CAC ratio, rather than CPA alone, becomes the primary evaluation metric for channel investment decisions. So channels with LTV and CAC below 3-to-1 are candidates for reduction. Channels above 5-to-1 are candidates for scaling. Channels in between warrant sort of a case-by-case judgment based on that strategic fit. The fourth action is to build channel saturation diagnostics that detect diminishing returns on incremental spend. So plot marginal CPA against total channel investment over the trailing 8 quarters, surface the saturation curve to marketing leadership, and use it to inform reallocation decisions when channels move from below to above saturation. The saturation analysis is what prevents the common failure mode of doubling down on previously efficient channels until they break. The fifth action is to integrate intent data and predictive scoring from 6sense, Demandbase, Bombora, and MadKudu into the channel routing logic so high-intent accounts receive higher touch treatment regardless of the source. Configure lean data or distribution engine to route by intent score in addition to source. You want to instrument the CPA impact of intent-driven routing in the BI layer and validate that the intent integration is producing measurable CPA improvements rather than just adding cost. So companies that have integrated carefully typically see a 15 to 25% CPA improvement within 2 quarters. So that's my overview of CPA. I hope this helps you in your RevOps practice. Leave a comment and let us know what other topics you'd like us to cover in this RevOps space. We're trying to create a whole dictionary of coverage of every single RevOps concept and how it fits together to improve the excellence of your and our RevOps practice.